Welcome back to This Week in Royal History, where we take a look at the captivating stories of royals from around the world, across various centuries, and explore the impact they had on history and society. Through their triumphs and tragedies, these royals shaped the world we live in today, leaving behind legacies that continue to inspire and intrigue us. So sit back, relax, and journey with us through time as we explore the enchanting and sometimes tragic lives of the royals who have captured our hearts and imaginations throughout the ages.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Born on the 23rd of June, 1456, to Dorothea of Brandenburg and Christian I, King of Denmark, Margaret of Denmark had a life that was not made for the history books, until she was betrothed to James III of Scotland in 1468. She was 12 years old. Margaret and James were married at Holyrood Abbey in July 1469. In March 1473, Margaret gave birth to their first child, who would later become James IV, while James IV later wed the daughter of Henry VII, Margaret Tudor. The royal family grew with the births of two more sons, James Stuart and John Stuart. Margaret's elegance and taste for fashion were well documented, with records highlighting her collection of remarkable gowns. Tragically, Margaret's life was cut short when she passed away at Stirling Castle in Scotland on the 14th of July, 1486, at the age of 30. She was laid to rest in a nearby abbey. When James III died in 1488, he was buried beside her, sealing their legacy together. Sticking with the 15th century, now we look at Joan Beaufort, Queen of Scotland. Joan was the great-grandmother of James III that we just mentioned, but what was her background? Joan's birth year is unknown, but some say it was around 1404. She was the daughter of John Beaufort, 1st Earl of Somerset, and Margaret Holland. Her father was the legitimized son of John of Gaunt and his mistress-turned-wife, Catherine Swynford. Joan was a half-niece to King Henry IV of England, second cousin to Richard II of England, and great-grandmother to Edward III. And if you haven't figured this out yet, she was also aunt to Margaret Beaufort. Anyway, in 1420, James I of Scotland met Joan while he was a prisoner in England, and their marriage was a part of the agreement for his release. They were wed in Southwark, London, in February 1424, and were crowned together in Scotland that May. Joan and James had 8 children, including the future James II of Scotland, and Margaret, future Queen of France, as wife of Louis XI. In February 1437, Joan was injured during an assassination of her husband in Perth. She became regent for her young son. In July 1439, she married James Stuart, the Black Knight of Lorne, and had 3 sons in as many years. In August 1439, Joan was arrested and forced to relinquish her regency to Alexander Livingston, governor of Stirling Castle. Joan died on the 15th of July, 1445, and is buried at a Carthusian priory in Perth. On the 16th of July, 1377, the grand halls of Westminster Abbey buzzed with excitement as 10-year-old Richard II was crowned King of England. Stepping into the shoes of his legendary grandfather, Edward III, young Richard's ascent to the throne was nothing short of spectacular. The day before his coronation, Richard led an unforgettable procession from the Tower of London to Westminster Abbey, parading through Cheapside, Fleet Street, and the Strand. This was the first ever coronation procession, and it captivated the hearts of the people who had waited nearly 50 years for such a momentous occasion. The streets were alive with anticipation and joy as crowds gathered to witness the young king's journey. The air was filled with excitement, making Richard II's coronation a historic and electrifying event that would be remembered for generations. On the 16th of July, 1517, Frances Brandon made her grand entrance into the world. Born to the illustrious Charles Brandon, 1st Duke of Suffolk, and Mary Tudor, Dowager Queen of France and sister to none other than Henry VIII of England. Growing up in the shadow of royalty, Frances formed a tight-knit bond with her cousin, future Mary I, and shared a close relationship with her influential aunt, Catherine of Aragon. In 1533, Frances's life took another thrilling turn when she married Henry Grey, Marquess of Dorset, at the opulent Suffolk Place. Their union was blessed with 3 daughters, ensuring the continuation of their noble lineage. However, the joy of her wedding was soon overshadowed by tragedy, as her beloved mother passed away shortly afterward. Despite this loss, Frances's life remained woven into the vibrant and tumultuous tapestry of Tudor England, her story marked by the splendor and sorrow of her time. Frances Brandon was a formidable presence at the Tudor court, rising to one of its highest-ranking women. In 1537, she commanded attention as she led the grand funeral procession for Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife. Then tragedy struck again in 1551 when her 2 half-brothers died. But this loss was paired with a rise in status as her husband was bestowed the title of Duke of Suffolk. Frances's life became even more entwined with royal drama when her daughter, Lady Jane Grey, was named heir to Edward VI in his will, bypassing his half-sisters. On the 10th of July, 1553, Jane was proclaimed Queen of England, but her reign was short-lived, lasting a mere 9 days before Mary I seized the throne. The fallout was brutal. Frances's daughter, son-in-law, and husband were all executed in February 1554 for their involvement in the political turmoil. Despite these devastating losses, Frances managed to retain some land for her family, although she lived in relative poverty until Mary I's reign. In March 1555, she found solace and companionship by marrying Adrian Stokes, her master of the horse. They had 3 children, but all died in infancy. Frances's own life came to a close on the 20th of November, 1559, at the age of 42, with her 2 surviving daughters by her side. She was laid to rest at Westminster Abbey, her life a poignant tale of ambition, tragedy, and resilience in the turbulent world of Tudor England. Anne of Cleves, the 4th wife of King Henry VIII, passed away on the 16th of June, 1557. Her death marked the end of a peaceful and relatively prosperous life, especially compared to the fates of some of Henry's other wives. On the day of her death, Anne had been residing at Chelsea Old Manor, a property that she was granted following her annulment from Henry VIII. In her final days, she had been suffering from a prolonged illness. Despite the initial shock and upheaval of her brief marriage to Henry, Anne had managed to live out her later years in comfort and dignity, enjoying the king's favor and generous settlement. That included several estates. News of Anne's death would have traveled swiftly to the royal court. Though she had long since faded from the political spotlight, her passing was significant. She was, after all, still the king's beloved sister, a title granted to her after the annulment. Anne's peaceful end and the respect she commanded were in a stark contrast to the violent and tragic ends met by some of Henry's other wives. Anne of Cleves was buried with honors befitting her status. Her funeral was conducted with solemnity and respect, reflecting her noble birth and the dignified life she had led in England. She was interred at Westminster Abbey, where her tomb remains to this day. a testament to the quiet strength and resilience of a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of Tudor politics with grace and composure. On the 17th of July, 1917, George V of the United Kingdom issued a royal proclamation to change the surname of the British royal family from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor, due to a high anti-German sentiment during World War I. The name Windsor had been associated with royalty since medieval times, with Windsor Castle in Windsor, Berkshire. Exactly a year later, George V's cousin, Tsar Nicholas II, and his family were executed. Nicholas, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, had been held under house arrest for a little over a year, and on the 17th of July, 1918, they were awoken in the early hours and told to dress. Under the impression they were moving to another house to avoid anti-Bolshevik forces, the family, their doctors, and 3 servants were led to the basement of the Ipatiev house, where they learned of the order for their executions only moments before it happened. A firing squad entered the room and began shooting. Their bodies were burned beyond recognition and buried in unmarked graves. Philippa of Lancaster was born on the 31st of March, 1360, at Leicester Castle in England, into the illustrious house of Lancaster. The daughter of John of Gaunt, 1st Duke of Lancaster, and Blanche of Lancaster, she was the granddaughter of Edward III of England. Growing up among her siblings, including her brother, the future Henry IV, Philippa's early life was steeped in complexities and the intrigues of the English court. Tragedy struck when Philippa was only 8 with the death of her mother. Her father remarried twice, and his 3rd wife, Catherine Swynford, who had been Philippa's governess, became a significant figure in her life. Through Catherine, Philippa was introduced to Geoffrey Chaucer, who would become her mentor and teacher, enriching her intellectual upbringing. In a politically strategic move, 27-year-old Philippa married John I of Portugal by proxy in February 1387, sealing an important alliance between England and Portugal. 12 days later, the couple finally met in person, embarking on a partnership that would produce 8 children, though not all survived to adulthood. Philippa is celebrated as the mother of the illustrious generation, whose offspring made significant historical contributions. Her life came to an end on the 19th of July, 1415, when she succumbed to the plague at the age of 55. Her legacy, however, endured beyond her death, as she was laid to rest with honor in Portugal, forever remembered for her role in shaping a dynasty that left a lasting impact on European history. Margaret of England was born on the 20th of July, 1346, at Windsor Castle. She was a cherished figure in the royal lineage of England. As the daughter of Edward III and Philippa of Hainault, she held the distinction of being the last princess born to a reigning monarch in England until the birth of Elizabeth of York in 1466. Known affectionately as Margaret of Windsor, she symbolized the hopes and lineage of the English crown during her short life. In May 1359, Margaret embarked on a union that would further connect noble houses when she married John Hastings, 2nd Earl of Pembroke. However, tragedy struck all too soon. At the tender age of 15, Margaret's life ended in late 1361. Shrouded in mystery regarding the exact date and circumstances of her passing. She found her final resting place at Abingdon Abbey, leaving behind the legacy tinged with both promise and sorrow, a poignant reminder of the fragility of life in medieval England. And lastly, we end with the death of John II of Castile. John was born on the 6th of March, 1405, to Henry III of Castile and Catherine of Lancaster. In December 1406, following his father's death, John ascended to the thrones of Castile and Leon. His early reign was shaped by the guidance of his mother and his uncle, Ferdinand I of Aragon, who served as co-regents until Ferdinand's death in 1416, after which Catherine of Lancaster assumed sole regency until her passing in 1418. Despite his lengthy 48-year campaign, John's interests lean more towards the thrill of hunting and the pageantry of tournaments than the rigors of governance. He relied heavily on the counsel of those in his inner circle, whose influence shaped his decisions and policies. In 1418, John married his first cousin, Maria of Aragon, sparking a union that produced 4 children, though only their son, Henry IV of Castile, survived into adulthood. In 1445, tragedy struck with Maria's death, prompting John to marry again in 1447. His bride, Isabella of Portugal, was significantly younger at 19 years old, while John himself was 42. Together, they had 2 children, including their daughter Isabella, who would go on to marry Ferdinand II of Aragon, marking the beginning of the union that would unite Spain. John's legacy was sealed with his death on the 20th of July, 1454, in Spain, leaving behind a kingdom poised for significant changes under the future reign of his daughter, Isabella I. His life was a tapestry of royal intrigue, familial alliances, and the quest for personal pursuits amid the responsibilities of kingship. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of This Week in Royal History. Until next time. I had a fantastic time in England and will be going back as soon as I can. Would you like to come with me?
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Tudors Dynasty Podcast. You can follow and support the Tudors Dynasty Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon @Tudors Dynasty.